Hello, everybody. It's Sales Chats time. And today we've got a very, very exciting show. Hey, John, how are you?
Yeah, great. New day, new time.
New day, new time. And we brought it with a great guest to start things off. We've got Tony Zambito, and we're going to be talking about improving sales effectiveness with buyer personas. And the best thing of all, guess who? I mean, hey, Tony, how are you?
Yeah. Hey there, how are you? I'm excited to be here and have a chat with you guys.
A little bit about Tony, and he's probably too modest, but we literally have the godfather, the founder, and creator of buyer personas to inform marketing and sales strategies.
Yeah, I mean, it must be great, Tony. I mean, there's so much talk about buyer personas today as if it's a brand new thing, and obviously something you've been talking about for a long, long time.
Yeah, it's exciting to see where it's at. You know, from the humble days of 2001 to, you know, evangelizing to now seeing more widespread use. And, you know, my goal is to obviously make sure that people really get the full awareness and benefit of buyer personas.
Yeah, it's great, and we can dive right in. So, you know, the first question I think that we should just kind of cover off on is how is a buyer persona and a target audience different? Because a lot of people have definitions out there. Let's start by getting foundational.
Yeah, that's a great question because, you know, there's always confusion between, you know, the common language around segmentation, profiling, audience, target, so forth and so on. So the way these two things differ is typically a target audience or a target segment is your broad category of customers or potential buyers in a marketplace. And where buyer personas really come into play is then doing the deep dive into trying to understand the underlying goals and motivations of that particular segment or group of buyers, if you will. So, for example, if you have an organization that makes a cloud-based project management application for a group of industrial and mechanical engineering, you're certainly not going to do buyer personas on accountants. Okay, so what you really want to do then is say, it's okay, well, in industrial engineering and mechanical engineering, what are the goals that are driving the activities in that particular segment, and how do we really get to really understand what people are trying to accomplish there? And that helps kind of help the separation between a target segment, if you will, and a buyer persona.
So do you think that even today, the concept of buyer persona, while there's a lot of talk about it, is still not as widely adopted or understood as it could be, you know, given obviously some of the confusion with target audience, buyer persona, but why do you think a lot of organizations still struggle with the concept?
I think a lot of organizations struggle because of that one issue that we just started on. You'll have people within organizations who believe that they already know their customers. And they think they already know their customers because of, well, I understand the segment we're going after, so what more do we need to know? Well, the behavior is changing. You know, buying and selling is all about goal-directed behavior. So now, organizations that are really benefiting from that is moving beyond this concept of a segment or just a profile to saying, look, we really need to understand the goals, the motivation, the attitude, the activities and behaviors of those particular buying groups so that we can be more effective and be more relevant to them.
Well, and so let's bring this to the Sales Chats audience, right? We're always, you know, focused here on sales and the sales professional. And so let's ask, what value do buyer personas bring to your sales efforts on a day-to-day basis?
Right.
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, from a historical perspective, you know, a lot of my background began in sales, and what may be surprising to many of the sales professionals listening today is that the very first users, if you will, appliers of buyer personas when we first launched this in 2001 were sales organizations, not marketing organizations. And let me tell you why. Because the sales effort gave these organizations the ability to anticipate the problems and anticipate the activities that buyers were going to be engaged in order to help them fulfill their particular goals. So now, as a sales professional, what you hope for is that ability to anticipate and that ability to have insight in the problem those types of scenarios that are taking place in organizations where you can then help people fulfill their goals. And that's really a great thing to be able to do from a sales effort. It puts you in a great position to help people.
So it's really what you're saying then from a sales point of view is, target audiences, very general, macro, but buyer personas is really getting down to the motivations of almost like individual buyers or individual types of buyers, and understanding how those motivations can connect to business drivers and how your solutions can connect to those motivations and those business drivers. So it's critically important for sales to be able to connect like that.
Exactly. Buyer personas originated as a goal-directed process. And what I mean by that is really understanding the goals that are driving people in their behavior and in their activities and this path toward accomplishing a goal. So what makes it great for salespeople, because they're in a great position to help somebody see how they can come along this path of fulfilling their particular goals, and that's a great position that salespeople can be in. And so, an objective for sales professionals then is to say, how can I help an individual buyer or a buying team, an organization, see me personally, see my brand, see my products and services and solution as part of their goal to accomplish something. How do I become part of that goal? That's the ultimate place that a sales professional can find themselves in when they can work toward achieving that. Because now you've become symbiotic with what the organization is trying to accomplish, and you are seen as being a fit into that path toward accomplishing a specific goal.
Well, and really this is a well-worn topic on sales chats, but it never gets old, because what we're talking about here is process. What we're talking here about is planning, right? So understanding what those goals may be means doing some deep thinking on your buyers and their needs, doesn't it?
It does. And the big thing I'd like sales professionals to visualize in their head today is this: that an individual buyer or a buying team in a B2B setting will have a specific goals or set of goals, and they're trying to find an end way of accomplishing those particular goals. So there's going to be multiple scenarios, multiple situations that happen in between that. So now you as a sales professional, if you can work in first identifying those situations and those scenarios, and then helping companies, individual buyers and buying teams to overcome those particular situations or scenarios, then you are really in a great position to help the company, the buyers, see that connection between, okay, I'm here to help you get from point A to point B, and our solutions, me personally, as a consultant, can help you get there.
So it's probably fair to say then that there's probably a lot of salespeople today who are probably creating buyer personas without even knowing that they're doing that, just because they're good salespeople and they're trying to understand the people that they're selling to. And then there's probably other people in marketing doing, similar work. So it begs the question, really, at the end of the day, who should be creating the buyer personas within your organization? If you're focused on it, who actually should be doing the work, or should it be a collaborative effort?
Well, it's a great question, and unfortunately, sometimes it's a loaded question in order to prove.
Yeah, we love loaded questions.
Well,
I've seen it used, unfortunately, where as a loaded question. Let's say, for example, being candid as we are, that marketing should do it. Well, let's put it this way: the place in an organization that should do it is the place that can best get the unfiltered qualitative interviewing accomplished.
Ooh,
where
like
the buyer has no blockage, if you will, or in their head about hindrance in providing their candid thoughts or their thinking. So sometimes in an organization, it's neither marketing or sales. It could come from strategy. They might have some very excellent people who are superb in their background in qualitative interviewing. For example, Intel has a group of ethnographers. So Intel sends their ethnographers to go out and do that. So it's not really marketing or sales. So other times, you know, an organization has to be candid with itself and say, you know what, no matter who we send, we're gonna the potential buyers and customers are going to see an agenda. Therefore, we need to use a very objective third party in order to get that unfiltered sense of what are the underlying goals and motivations of the people involved. So now, you know, speaking of sales, I will tell you a little anecdote. Is one time I went to interview a series of buyers and customers at Apple, and accompanying me was a salesperson. And I can tell you, the salesperson was probably one of the better qualitative interviewers. He had a background in that. But he had that ability to remove the agenda, remove the sales agenda out of the room where the customer was able to provide unfiltered feedback. So, you know, it's a collaborative effort, but it also means that organizations have to be candid with themselves and say, can we truly get the unfiltered view?
Well, you know, that's a real danger, too, because just commenting from personal experience in the marketing organizations that I've led, it always has fallen into marketing's camp. Now, maybe that's because I get out there and raise my hand and say, we're going to do these buyer personas.
Yeah, it's your own fault.
But I agree with you. I think one of the potholes that's very dangerous to step into is introducing bias at the outset when you're creating a buyer persona, right? Don't you think that that's something you encounter all the time?
Yes, it's actually it's a very important subject that you bring up, because there is, you know, when you introduce bias or you introduce this concept of what's called predetermination in qualitative research, you've already tainted the outcome, and you're not getting the true deep insight that you're looking for. So that's a very important concept, and so, you know, sometimes marketing may not be the best place for buyer personas, because there might be some bias in order to, you know, try to achieve a campaign objective, for example. Other reasons why marketing may not be a good place sometimes is that a perception is built upon the part of buyers and customers because they've been inundated with content and have developed a perception that they're not welcome then anymore. So any kind of conversation could be, you know, introducing bias and predetermination because of things that have happened. So history, previous experiences, all those things have to be weighed into the picture.
And I love what you said at the very beginning, because I always like to boil it down to like really fundamental things, and that is a lot of people think, well, we know our customers. And I often have these conversations when I ask people about buyer personas and even their target buyers and target markets. And then, you know, they say, oh, yeah, we know who that is. And you say, well, when's the last time you spoke to them to see if their buying behaviors, if their motivations have changed? And then you discover that, well, they haven't talked to them recently about that. So I think, again, from a bias point of view, it's like sometimes, you know, we can be very arrogant and sort of say, yeah, we know our buyer. We don't need to do that kind of work.
Yeah, that's a very prominent situation in a lot of organizations today. You know, particularly, you know, surprisingly, I should say, it happens often in organizations where the leadership are actually representatives of that particular buying group. What I mean is, you know, maybe perhaps they were an engineer earlier in their career, and now they're suddenly, you know, leading an organization as a chief operating officer, but still think of themselves as an engineer, and therefore, what are they doing? They're becoming self-referential about what they think they know about engineers. And, but they probably haven't been an engineer in 25 years. So there's a lot of, you know, that's the point, is that there's the external and internal influences that are drastically changing people's goals. Goals change. The behavior toward accomplishing goals change. And you know, the use of new technology to accomplish goals. These are all factors that you have to consider when you think about a buyer persona in particular.
So let's break it down to a fundamental level to give kind of the building blocks to our audience about how they should attack creating buyer personas. So when creating a buyer persona, what are the main questions that we should be asking?
Yeah, that's from the foundational standpoint, when they think about buyer personas, what I would like people to think about is how do they get to understand the goals that people are trying to accomplish. So therefore, you have to have questions that are open-ended, that are related to having people talk about their story, talk about their experiences, talk about what things mean to them. And that's where you really want that unfiltered, unstructured conversational style in order to get that story to come out. Obviously we only have limited time, and I can't get into a whole detailed qualitative research questioning technique, and there are experts in that. But in general, what I'd like to have people become aware of is that, the idea is that for every product and for every buyer, there's a story behind it. And the goal of a sales professional is to uncover that story. And you can do that individually, and buyer personas can help illuminate that story.
Well, and what I'm also hearing kind of as the subtext of the language here is really around having a conversation and getting to some of the emotion behind the buy, behind the goal, right? What are the pressures that they're feeling? What happens if this goal is unmet? What happens if we remain at the status quo? What does that make you feel like? Or, teasing out those kinds of things, because that to me is where the real nuggets of buyer personas exist.
And being confident to let them be candid and to listen to that feedback.
Yeah, it's a great topic. Something I've been actually spending a little time on this week, in fact. When you look at a prevailing notion in business to business in particular over the past few decades, a lot of organizations have operated on an assumption that business to business purchasing and buying decisions are pretty rational. It's all based on logic. It's all based on criteria and requirements. Well, obviously, what has blown the lid off of that is digital technologies, and we're finding that emotions and goals are a big part of buying decisions today in B2B. And we're also seeing this transference of consumer behavior and consumer-like emotions and goals into the context of a business world. So yeah, it is no longer prudent for any organization to plan entirely on this 100% assumption that businesses make rational decision making only. They have to factor in that there's emotion, there's goals, directed type behaviors, and there is a rational aspect, but it's all melded together. It's no longer just a rational, criteria-based, requirement-based decision.
Well, perhaps that was a myth to begin with, right? Like,
yeah, sure,
that people are totally rational and almost, for Star Trek fans out there, Spock-like, where,
especially in B2B, because I love the thing. Yeah. I mean, you make a bad consumer buying decision, what's the worst that can happen? You've lost your money, or your wife knocks you across the head with something. Yeah.
Right.
But in B2B, you make a purchase, it can get you promoted and it can get you fired. So there's a huge amount of emotion tied up in that.
Well, here's the thing. This is why this is a really, really important topic in this day and age. Because if you look at even in the last 5 to 10 years, going back even 30 years, many organizations have made decisions on marketing and sales strategies based on this myth, this notion of rational decision making. So when you look at this, if you really take this and you go back and you look at the ton of sales training and content and all that great stuff around this particular topic, what do you see? You see everything about criteria, you see everything about requirements. What's missing is goals and emotions. You don't see any conversation about that going as far back as the 60s and 70s. So this is a really, really important topic, and since we're on the topic of buyer personas, here's a little something I would like people to think about. There are a lot of individuals, a lot of consultants, marketing agencies who say they do buyer personas. But what they're really doing is they're doing buyer profiles of what? Rational decision making. The profile is after what? I want to know the criteria of a rational decision making. I want to know what they look for from a rational decision making. So what happens is it's still, this myth is still informing, if you will, how companies go about trying to understand customers and how they implement their marketing and sales strategy. And organizations today got to get off of this vicious treadmill. They're spinning and spinning and spinning on this for years and not really understanding that the equation has changed drastically, where now emotions and goals are a much larger part of buying decisions, and they've been largely ignored.
How are you catching, or how are you advising your clients to catch themselves when they go into this almost, rational mode?
Yeah, that's a great question, Eric, because really what happens here is that if from the outset you make it clear what your qualitative buyer research is going to be about, that's when you start setting the tone of what you're looking for. You're looking for goals, you're looking for emotions, you're looking for goal-directed behaviors that people are exhibiting in their effort to accomplish a goal. So that's the first piece of it. And then you model that for people, and now the most important part of this is how do you then map back to that? You got to map back your customer engagement, your sales engagement strategy directly to specific goals and those particular goal-directed activities and behaviors. That's really the power of buyer personas, is that ability to map your efforts and your engagements with customers directly back to a deep understanding of what goals they're trying to accomplish and what goal-directed behaviors are they utilizing and being active in order to accomplish those particular goals.
So it sounds like there's quite a lot of potholes or pitfalls that you can encounter when you start down this road. Are there some basic, rookie mistakes you could guide us and save us from when people start down the buyer persona route? Are there some rookie mistakes to avoid?
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake to avoid is to, there are several rookie mistakes. Number one is to not buy pizza and beer and go in a conference room and think that you can just put this together in an hour. I've seen that happen quite a bit.
We're going to knock out buyer personas today.
And there we go.
It's not even going to take an hour.
That's rookie mistake number one. I think rookie mistake number two is basically not doing adequate research. And this goes back to the topic we were talking about earlier. By adequate, it means that you really need to have some specialty, some expertise in qualitative research, in particularly the goal-directed type of techniques, in order to really uncover the underlying goals and motivations of your buyers and your customers. So, a rookie mistake is just not doing adequate research. I think a third rookie mistake would be to treat this as a profiling exercise. Salespeople, sales professionals, they get this. You've been through the Miller-Hyman things. You've been through a number of different things that are all profiling. So a rookie mistake is to take that kind of a profiling, slap a picture on it, and then call it a buyer persona. That's a bad rookie mistake. And unfortunately, in my kudos to sales, marketing is predominantly one that makes this mistake often, because this is their first exposure to profiling that sales have had for many years, and that's what they think personas is all about, and unfortunately it's not. So I think that the profiling is a pretty significant mistake that they make.
Well, it's interesting because in the marketing world, there's definitely the concept of the ICP, right? The ideal customer profile, which is separate from a buyer persona, but also, really important to a business. And
that's correct. And basically,
to confuse everybody even more.
Yeah, to confuse everybody more, but it's not really that confusing because, in the B2B world, and I'm assuming today that we have many business-to-business sales professionals. So when an organization talks about their ideal customer profile, having been in sales for, a good part of my early career, what do we typically think about? We're thinking about companies. So what you're looking for as a sales professional is that propensity to buy on the part of a company. And it really has nothing to do with a buyer persona per se. That's why it's a different thing. So you are looking for that ideal company that exhibit this propensity to buy. What are those kind of propensity to buy? So, for example, I started out with this, this for instance of a cloud application for project management for industrial mechanical engineers. So, what's the propensity to buy in that? You're going to be looking for organizations that are, have many clients that they do a lot of industrial mechanical engineering for. You might say they're pretty complex projects. There are a number of different things that you are looking for from a company perspective. So now, once you've identified that, your target, your ideal company profile, if you want to call it that, you now are looking for the buyer personas to try to understand those underlying goals, those goal-directed behaviors of the people within that company. And what drives their daily activities, what drives the goals they're trying to accomplish. Those are the kind of different things in different way of thinking. It doesn't have to be that complicated.
Do you think it's helpful to use a kind of a methodology or even a construct like one of a funnel? Because when you're thinking about ICPs, or at least as I do as a marketer, you're thinking about target groups to either advertise to or to attract with content or get as part of your kind of marketing mix, right? So that you can appeal to that segment because everything is nothing, right? And especially when you're spending money, you've got to spend it wisely to reach the right people. But then, what I'm really hearing coming through, and tell me if this is the wrong conclusion to draw, but what I'm really hearing coming through with buyer personas is it's almost once those people are inside your funnel, once they're already attracted and awareness has been achieved, now we have to really focus on goals because unless we do, we're never going to see a conversion.
Yeah, exactly. Here's a myth, I would say, behind the funnel and the so-called buying process and the buyer's journey. Okay, all of those are, to me, one and the same. I don't think there's any difference between those. I've been used interchangeably. The thing is that I've been really talking about goals. So now, typically people, when they are attempting to accomplish a particular goal, within their process, if you will, their path that they take, they are also going to have separate goals related to where they're at. So let me give you an example. Let's just take the simplest one of awareness, consideration, and intent. Some people say decision. Okay, you know what I'm talking about. But perhaps if somebody might be in the awareness, but they're operating on a set of goals while they're there. So it may be a simple goal such as, I feel as a professional, I need to stay aware of the latest technology in my industry. And I don't really want to fall short. I want to make sure that in any conversations I have, I feel like I have the latest information on technology. So let's say you do qualitative research and that comes out really strong. Well, now you're informed as an organization, both in marketing and sales. What do we need to do to help that person accomplish this particular goal when they're there? So the key thing is that remember that goals are very prominent throughout, not only toward an end goal, but throughout the entire process. There are goals kind of popping up that people want to accomplish, and that's a really important part of this. So let me take that as like number one perspective on that topic. The number two perspective on that topic is this. Particularly great for sales professionals to really get this. When you work with let's say the language in your organization is a target account, and you have 20 target accounts. what you should be looking for is that at any given moment in time, an organization is going to have perhaps 1, 2, or 3 scenarios that are going on simultaneously.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with the buyer's journey and buying process or funnel is that we tend to generalize and think that all 3 of those scenarios are going to kind of go the same way.
Right.
That's not true.
Mm-hmm.
That's not true. We really need to get behind each one of those and find out what's the path toward that end goal they're trying to get at. And guess what? For scenario number 1, it might be very high stakes. It might be a $500,000 decision. And my goodness, there's going to be 8 different things that are going to happen. And there's going to be 8 different set of goals that are going on. Where, now, we're looking at perhaps a different kind of decision, $50,000. It just may not be as complicated. So where sales professionals can get themselves a little mixed up is when they start treating all of those the same and find themselves getting in the way instead of helping.
Yeah, actually, let me just take you back for a moment, because you've mentioned a number of times during this this incredible chat that we're having, and Twitter's on fire right now, about research. And it's one of the things that does bother me a little bit, because I think we've seen the dumbing down of research over the last number of years, because anybody with a survey tool, thinks I'll send out a survey, get a bunch of responses. Now I've got some research, I've got some data, and off I go. And you've mentioned a number of times about getting people who really understand how to do qualitative research, etc. So do you think that's something that people are overlooking, the importance of really having experts do that and understanding how to do that properly, because you've all these other people who think a survey tool is all they need?
I think it's a great question, John. I honestly think it's problematic, and it's one of the symptoms of where we are with buyer personas today, is that anybody believes that they can just do qualitative research or have a few conversations with customers and away they go. Unfortunately, that's not true. When you are really trying to uncover underlying goals and motivations, attitudes, it takes some skill, it takes some effort behind that. And so, you have to literally borrow from the social sciences of ethnography, anthropology. There's a digital anthropology and ethnography kind of aspect today too as well. But those are really, really important. So when I started in doing this, my background, I did have a minor in anthropology, but I had a great interest in learning more and getting deeper in that particular space. So I think one of the myths for people is to think that you can just have unscripted or unstructured conversations and away you go. There is a degree of technique and knowledge and expert that is needed for this. For example, if you have a toothache, you're not going to go to a chiropractor, okay? Right? So this is the same thing. If an organization has a toothache and trying to understand their customers, they better get a dentist that sure as heck knows how to talk to these customers and really understand deeply what the problems are.
Well, when you think about it, right, I mean, it stands to reason, doesn't it? I mean, if somebody does it and they're not skilled in doing it, and you create buyer personas that aren't really that good, the damage that could do is could be quite dramatic.
Oh yeah. You have to be let me put it this way: the buyer persona is basically an outcome of your research. And then it becomes a starting point for many organizations. It's the starting point to say that now that we've been able to synthesize and model this information about customers, what does this mean to us? What are the implications for us as an organization? So a lot of organizations today are trying to focus on how do we improve our customer engagement. And this is where this can really be helpful because you are, this is a starting point to discuss how you go about doing that based on what you've been able to learn about your customers. And that's why the research aspect of this is so vital. It's so vital.
And so would you say that it's wise to even pursue an outcome before you've even kind of determined or just had these open-ended conversations? I mean, I guess the question is, can a business have multiple buyer personas, and how many buyer personas do I need, or is that presuming too much?
You know, I think a lot of organizations go about this the wrong way in this way, where from the outset they believe or they equate a buyer persona to a role. So suddenly they're saying, I need 50 buyer personas because we're in 3 different segments and there are 7 different roles and we've got to have a buyer persona for each. Okay, that's getting themselves in trouble in the sense that nobody's ever going to use that many personas.
Right.
So let's go back to the foundation of personas. The foundation of personas is to uncover underlying goals and uncover goal-directed behavior. So when you determine how many buyer personas you need, you determine that by differentiating the goals. So if you have a buying group and their specific goals and their goal-directed behaviors and activity are extremely different than, let's say, another buying group, that tells you need a different buyer persona, because now I just talked about what, like, it's the starting point. It informs you on what your strategies, your engagement should be. So obviously, if that is the case, buying group A has a very specific set of goals and goal-directed behaviors that are very different than buying group B. So you definitely need 2 buyer personas, and your marketing and engagement activities to A map back to their specific goals are going to be very different than you would be with group B. And that tells you how many you need, is when the goals are so different, so extremely different.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like that it's that eternal kind of conflict between, on the one hand, being too general, and on the other hand, being too nuanced. So how do you get the balance right?
Well, you know, it's a great question, and this is how you get the balance right. When you look at the idea of buyer research, and then you're modeling that research into personas, you're modeling that research into what we call buying scenarios, the mental framing around particular goals, you're modeling all of that. What that is pattern recognition. So in other words, when you do the research, you are basically saying that there was a very distinct pattern of behavior that was identified. So more than likely, 80 to 90% of the time, this is the type of pattern you will find in this particular group of buyers or this particular segment, and that's where that's where the balance comes, because you don't want to get so granular, so nuanced that it just drives everybody crazy and you can't make sense of it. But you do want to have the depth of the pattern be very evident as part of your buyer personas.
So speaking of patterns, one of the things that just seems fascinating to me, from somebody that's been practicing this art for so long, I mean, we're talking about a decade and a half, mm-hmm. What are some of the beliefs that you had kind of starting with buyer personas that maybe have changed over time or evolved in your thinking?
Oh, great question.
Yeah, you know, I will say that some of the foundational things haven't changed. So the foundational things that are important to think about is that, you know, the essence of human goals and the goal-directed behaviors, you know, is still what we're after. We're still after that. Yeah. And they are going to change in their nature because of influences like digital technology. But the essence of how people think about goals and their goal-directed behaviors is remaining is foundational to personas. The things that have changed for me then beyond that is that I pay particular attention to the things that are going on. Okay, what are the new patterns of scenarios that are taking place in companies, and what are the new patterns of what I call mental models or mental framing around goals that are taking place in organizations. And those are the things that could really be helpful in identifying. So let me just take something, example like a cloud. Let's talk about why that's so important to do research and then change your belief system to some degree in understanding why markets change. In the cloud, now many small to mid-sized businesses have had a barrier removed to grow quickly and to get global. So the mental framing around their goals are going to be very different. So in other words, if I had, what could change is if let's say we were doing an interview with the small to mid-sized business, just for simplicity's sake, 15 years ago, they may be talking about local, I'd like to expand by 2-3 cities, become more regional. I might want to get some shipping going. Now, what does this conversation look like for a small to mid-sized business, right? I'm global. I'm looking to expand in the Asia Pac. I need this type of skill now. So what we're seeing is being attentive to the different scenarios that are happening in business today because of external influences, because of the digital economy. But the idea of that people are driven by human goals and have goal-directed behavior that drive their activities doesn't go away. That's the foundation of personas.
Excellent. So back to another fundamental, right? So as we said earlier, a lot of companies already think, well, we know our buyer, so we don't have to do any work. But the enlightened ones who say, okay, perhaps our buyer has changed, we need to do some of this work. How often should they be coming back and revalidating and checking on their buyer personas?
That's a great question. My pat answer nowadays is this should be ongoing every day. Okay, right. So let's start there. The way business is evolving today is there are a lot of inputs coming in addition to qualitative interviewing that you should be doing. So let's say you establish a base of qualitative interviewing, model these personas, you feel good about them. Well, you're going to consistently get input from different parts of the organization that could contribute to this evolving nature of your personas. And at some point, whether it's 6 months or a year, you will want to know that, that we may need to do a refresh level of interviewing qualitatively in order to make sure that that goals aren't changing drastically, that we're still mapping and meeting the goals of our customers and our buyers. So once you get, the real answer, what should pop up when suddenly you see, whoops, it looks like a goal has changed pretty drastically, and we need to go find out how it changed, what are some new goals that this buyer or customer group is really operating from, and that's a really key thing to keep in place. So now let me just augment this conversation with this. Buyer personas, in general, should not be a one-time exercise, and then you print them on a wall, and then you kind of put them in your desk. Everybody has their review, and you walk away. Right. I would like people to realize that a buyer persona must be treated like a real person. So when that person should get an invite to every meeting, every strategy meeting, every planning meeting. They should be there. And you should be using that person, that buyer persona, as a point of validation. So let's say you have somebody, his name is John Adams, okay, and he's your buyer persona. Well, you have a discussion going on, and now you know that buyer personas are a starting point. Well, then somebody has to pop up and say, well, we've got John Adams sitting over here. What do we think John Adams would think about what we're planning to do? And that's how you should have buyer personas as part of your DNA in an organization.
Well, I mean, that actually presumes the next question, which is what role does buyer personas, play in sales strategy? Right. So, I mean, literally, is it the sales team talking to John Adams and inviting him along for the sales call? Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If I'm a sales professional and, I'm working for an organization and they've been given this, wonderful blessing of, geez, I've got this great insight. Well, before you go on a sales call, have a conversation and anticipate. This is the thing that you're going to be able to do. They really work well for you when you can anticipate the types of situations you're going to expect to find this buyer in, perhaps anticipate the types of questions he or she may have, You may also be reminded of other scenarios that you've been involved in. Let me give you an example. There are a lot of sales professionals are going to get this. There are a lot of times when things go dark, and you know what I mean. They go dark. You got
every person listening to this knows exactly what you mean.
Yeah, people just put their heads in their hands. Sure.
Yeah, experience the time when it goes dark. And here's where buyer personas could be really, really beneficial.
Yeah.
You know now through qualitative research and modeling that typically in this type of scenario, this person may have to have 2 or 3 meetings before they can take this next step.
Right.
And sometimes when you don't know that, you're in the dark. You're sending emails, you're leaving voicemails, and just checking in, what's going on, not realizing that this person has to have 2 or 3 meetings completed before he or she can get to the next step. So now if you can anticipate that, what that gives you the ability to do. You're talking to a real John Adams, and you say, John, now I recognize, and I'm guessing here and anticipating because of the situation you're in, you more than likely have to talk to maybe 2 or 3 additional people. So what can I do to help you with that? And what does that do for John Adams? John Adams sitting there going, that's a real sales professional because that person knows what my situation's like and what I need to do in order to accomplish a particular goal.
And the disparity between doing it that way and just sending a generic, almost treating you like a number check-in email is so drastic. Yeah. It can't even be overstated.
Yeah, it can't be overstated. And I've helped a lot of organizations who have developed additional tools now for their customers and their buyers who find themselves in these dark situations needing help. So you can really, a sales professional today is you must insert yourself into the goals of your buyers and you must help facilitate them accomplishing their goals. Yeah. And that's really what
I was going to say, it sounds to me, not just in sales strategy, but if you think of it in practical, in sales coaching and mentoring, right, on an ongoing basis, you can be doing role-playing and scenario playing using your buyer personas and using exactly what you just talked about to continue to educate your salespeople in how to navigate that buyer journey and the different phases of it. But it seems to me like buyer personas are a perfect tool for sales coaching.
Yes, they really are. They are tremendous. And let me give you some examples of this. I remember one of the first sales applications we did was for a brand new inside sales unit. So what did we do? We did the research, we modeled the buyer personas, and then before they ever got on the phone, what we did was we trained them, and we did role playing off of the personas. Well, let me tell you, the very first day that they went live, people were jumping out of their cubicles saying they can't believe they had 20, 30-minute conversations right off the bat because they were able to anticipate what that conversation was going to look like. In another case, we did this for HP, and we kind of rolled it out to about 150 field and inside salespeople. Same thing happened. It was a brand new type of service, and so then they were able to really have that ability to anticipate that types of conversation, understand what their goals were going to be, not only understand, but also to having conversations around those goals. And that's where the salespeople can really benefit from organizations who now make this a part of their sales enablement strategy. Because, here's how I view it personally. It's incumbent and it's an accountability on the part of organizations to give sales professionals the insight they need in order to be successful and in order to help their customers and buyers fulfill their goals. If they are not doing that, then they're not being accountable to sales professionals today.
Right.
Wow. I mean, deeper words cannot be spoken right there. Yeah. And of course, that all ties back to the main goal of sales, which is to increase your sales conversions. Right. I mean, to me, what you've laid out, Tony, is a very clear path between how buyer personas can be constructed, how they can be employed, what they should, essentially feature, and almost what we need to watch out for, rookie mistake-wise or otherwise. But then at the end of the day, this can be held up to that ever so tight metric of ROI and sales conversions, what every salesperson, at the end of the day is judged on.
Yeah, so it's not just this, as you know, because often things get dismissed by sales organizations as, well, that sounds like marketing mumbo jumbo over there. But what you've laid out is how it very practically and pragmatically impacts your ability to sell and convert.
Exactly, and you just mentioned like every salespeople, and I was there with everybody on this call today. We have our own accountability to reaching goals, reaching targets, ROI, all those good things, and we have to do that. Okay, where everybody needs to put some bread on the table, right? So, what we're talking though is how do we bridge the gap from working with customers and buyers to accomplishing our own specific goals, and this is where buyer personas can really help bridge the gap, because you now are going to become much more effective at helping customers. You're going to be much more effective at understanding what their goals are. You're going to be much more relevant to them when you can lay out the path of how they can fulfill their goals. And the most important thing is, how do you become part of their goals? It's the cool thing. If I were to say today, a sales professional, what their number one goal should be is to become part of their customer's goal, and that's really the key. So years ago, selling into the banking industry, portfolio management. Well, suddenly, for me, it was part of the ultimate thing was to be invited into a planning meeting of a strategy meeting for portfolio management for the next year. That means I accomplished the goal of becoming part of the customer's goal. Yeah. And that's really what sales professionals need to be today. They need to become almost an indispensable member or part or component of the customer's goal.
Yeah, a co-creator, if you will.
So you've laid out their practical steps to become that elusive, trusted advisor that people have to throw around. But what you just said there is that you become helpful to the customer, you become relevant to them, and then you become a collaborative part of them reaching their goals. I mean, I think those are beautiful.
And to me, John, to me that is going well beyond the trusted advisor thing.
Right.
But the trusted advisor basically says, you're gonna give a few recommendations and all that. No, the real thing about buyer personas and being a sales professional today is exactly what you just said. How can you be part of their goals? How do you be relevant? How are you seen as a co-creator, a co-collaborator, an indispensable part of their own goals and what they're trying to accomplish?
Well, it's interesting. I almost want to take this back to a ground level for just 1 second, because one of the things that's, just hitting me over the head really hard is what you're really talking about by investing in buyer personas and understanding the scenarios and pattern recognition, as you said before, is almost giving yourself permission to sell in some respects, right? Like, one of the great hurdles with people that aren't salespeople or that are becoming salespeople or that find themselves in sales careers is often this notion of, I've got to sell now. I've got to go and be somebody different, as opposed to, recognizing a pattern where if I'm part of helping somebody achieve their goals, I mean, what could be more noble than that?
Right, and to be honest, I mean, if somebody is doing that for you, you're willing to pay for that, right? And so you take that bit out of the equation as well, because if you're providing that value, then the person is going to be willing to pay. So it's not a big discussion around price money.
It's at the risk of sounding like a wise old man at this moment in my career, my advice to sales professionals is to be yourself and to be helpful. And the more you can understand how you can help people fulfill their goals, the more they're just going to really like you and resonate. That you can be part of their story, and they want you to be part of their story. Because you don't want to be coming off as somebody different at all. I mean, and that be who you are, and always be intentional on looking for those ways that you can be helpful in terms of understanding the customer, what they're trying to fulfill, what goals they're trying to fulfill, and how can you help them do that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I totally with you there. I mean, we totally believe in the idea of authenticity, and it's a discussion for another day. But I think some people are falling into the trap through social media and online networking that they start to create inauthentic personas of themselves. So again, discussion for another day. But I love that idea of if you are authentic and if you're helpful and if you're really interested and you want to collaborate, you want to help the sales or the customer. That's a whole different dynamic, and that becomes a much easier relationship.
Yes, one thing I will say that for B2B organizations and sales professionals to try to grasp their head around this. Typically, when you look at the amount of time that you invest in whether it's marketing or sales strategies, and individually as a sales professional, your effort. So the less you know up front, what does that mean? The longer that line becomes in trying to fulfill your goals and achievements. So if you make that investment up front to really get to know your customers, and for organizations who say we're gonna make that commitment to do the right kind of adequate research, what you've done is you've shortened that time in the end anyhow on how you can actually become a relevant, meaningful organization and sales professional to a group of buyers. So buyer personas. When you look at personas in general, that was one of the first business case kind of perspectives that was given way back in the mid-'90s. That if you did this research up front in product development, it shortened the product development cycle by 30–40%. So the same thing applies. So if we say we want to have a marketing and sales cycle, you spend 10% up front in research and modeling personas, you should be able to reduce your cycle and marketing and sales cycle by another 20 or 30% because you've got that understanding. And a lot of times, you're not, if you don't have that understanding, you're not getting the ROI. You're getting a cycle that's going on for 2 years and not getting any results.
Boy, those are some sage words there.
Yeah.
And you truly are proving to be a wise old man. And so,
hey, you don't look so old to me. I think there. Eric's
his
just the
words,
youngest.
not his words, not
Eric's
mine.
just the youngest of the group, so he's feeling all, the youth.
Well, and so what we love to cap sales chats with is kind of that flipping the script and turning things personal for one moment, and asking a wise old man one of your secrets to getting into the right mindset for success.
What is the tip for getting in the right mind of success? I'm going to say success is about helping others. So if you can put yourself in the mindset that there's a larger story here, I'm here to help people. And then that is the ticket to success. When you can make the story larger than just yourself, and you're there to help others. And no matter what profession you're in, I think that's true. But in sales professional in particular, I think that mindset is so significant because I think it separates. When you look at if we were to do a qualitative study on very successful sales professionals versus those who haven't, I think you'll find that mindset pretty prominent.
Yeah, great.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So put yourself in those shoes and see how you can help.
Right. Mm-hmm.
What great advice, and it's been fantastic. And so, I think you've actually executed on your own advice today by helping all of the folks who are listening to this, podcast and hangout really, kind of get straight in their mind around buyer personas, how they can help their business, how they can help their sales process, and really become better, starting today.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. A change in mindset will take you a few miles. So just remember that.
Yeah, and I think any of the salespeople listening in today are probably sort of have written down buyer persona. I need to work on this. We need to work on this. So it's probably a few organizations around the globe right now who are going to have a salesperson come through the door and say, hey, who can help me with buyer personas? Where's our buyer personas?
Well, and once again, people can find out more at your website, www.tonyzambito.com, just like it sounds. So once again, Tony, fantastic stuff today. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. I truly hope that we've been helpful to the audience today. That's our goal.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks again.
All right. Thank you.